The origin of color racism based on racial prejudice no longer is a puzzle or mystery. The fulsome notion was born in the Middle East. The idea first affected East African blacks and Eastern European Slavs. The outlook then traveled to Central and West Africa. White Europeans also felt the lash of color prejudice. The historical evidence of its origin is clear, convincing, and beyond any reasonable doubt. The select historical works presented here can help with understanding why, when, where, how, and with whom color racism with prejudice began. The Qur'an, revealed in the 7th century in the Muqaddimah of Ibn Khaldun from the 14th century, cover a period of 700 years well before the rise of the West. Theodore Noldeke's Sketches from Eastern History translated the Arabic recorded 9th century 14-year revolt of the Zanj. The Zanj were East African black slaves. Their uprising is perhaps the first black mass revolt against oppression of blacks that is reliably recorded in world history. The Zanj were corvée labor producing sugarcane for Muslims in Iraq. In 1972, Professor Bernard Lewis published the fact-filled, informative Race and Color in Islam. He revised it later as Race and Slavery in the Middle East. His opinions and analysis are their weakness. Classical scholar Frank Snowden wrote Blacks in Antiquity and Before Color Prejudice. As he shows, the ancient or classical Western world did not practice color racism. Western whites have done many condemnable things involving color racism and prejudice. Misleadingly, millions upon millions of writings wrongly and inaccurately assign them credit for having created color racism with prejudice. The sources of doctrine within the Islamic belief system are also the sources that generated Islamic color racism. The Prophet Muhammad died in 632. He received first revelations of the Qur'an in 610. He revealed the importance of language and color in 614 AD. These depictions from Arabic sources show him receiving the reading or the Qur'an from the angel Gabriel. Color racism with prejudice, as we continue to know and experience it, was generated from what Muhammad revealed in the Qur'an. The evidence for this is overwhelmingly abundant. Much of that copious doctrinal and historical evidence will be presented and discussed further below. The evidence from within the Arabic Qur'an correlates factually with a full record of historical references left by the belief system's early believers. A contemporary leading Islamic scholar teaching in the United States introduced readers to an aspect of Islamic doctrine of long standing. Professor Syed Hossein Nasser explained that a person's temperament, attitude, and being under Islam is determined by climate, sex, age, and racial heredity. God was seen to have fashioned Arabs with a favorable pedigree and a golden tan. Pedigree was important because everything started with womb relations, or in Arabic, ulu al-arham. This took on a defining importance and established a foundation for genetic bigotry. In a predetermined manner, starting in the womb, the Quran says God set skin color as a mark, a sign, or ayah in Arabic, For those who know, those gifted with intelligence under Islam. The importance of languages and colors is summed up in the Quran in Surah 30:22. وَمِنْ آيَاتِهِ خَلْقَ السَّمَوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَإِخْتِلَافَ أَلْسِنَتِكُمْ وَأَلْوَانِكُمْ إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Following the textual thread in the Quran, Islamic believers began to apply their insight to Surah 30:22. They then began to classify creatures racially using, quote, the color in themselves, unquote, that was applied by Allah. This is in the Quran in Surah 51:20-21, which says, quote, on the earth are signs for those of assured faith, as also in your own selves, unquote. The doctrinal racial thread has many strands. Surah 3:6, for example, indicates that it is God who colors or shapes you in the womb as He pleases. In this case, the name for God is Al-Musawwiru. Then, in Surah 2:138, we learn that God applied color as a baptism in a process of predestination that began in the womb. Translations from the Arabic sometimes shade meanings. Take Surah 2:138. More often than not, we learn that this baptism, what is translated as baptism actually in Arabic says, applies color. And when we learn also that it is He whom we worship, what this says is we become slaves to Him. Across the Quran, in several surahs, it self-references to stress its revelation as an Arabic Qur'an. Not just the Quran, but an Arabic Quran. The Quran itself does not hesitate to explain that the glorious Quran has brought a perfect message that is in Arabic, or as it states, a revelation from Allah, most gracious, most merciful, a Quran in Arabic for people who understand. In the world of Islam, green is said to be the color of the Prophet Muhammad. Historical evidence shows, however, that the Prophet Muhammad revelations about the importance of language and the color in ourselves lay the basis for the Islamic birth of color racism. The year is 671. Muslims had not yet reached Central or West Africa, but they knew East African blacks as Ethiopians, Nubians, and Zanj. A famous Arab poet found cause to insult East African Nubian blacks following the Quran, saying, the child of a stinking Nubian black God chose not to put any light in their complexion. This is tied to Surah 24:40. In the Arabic language, those whom your right hands possess is a euphemistic expression for the slaves Allah gave to Arabs as a favor. Surah 1671 in the Quran teaches that the wherewithal of life, or rizq in Arabic, should not be extended to those whom your right hands possess, your slaves. This means that equality under Islam is little more than propaganda and much less than truth. In the 10th century Egypt, a black eunuch was made a regent. This is something that could be misread and misinterpreted. The famed Arab poet Al-Mutanabbi had a few words to say that follow. Al-Mutanabbi's racist poem covered all the bases that we now know: slavery, the importance of race and color, the imprint of inferiority from the call or womb, one's root or pedigree at birth as a defining sign of merit or mercy, and all of these were covered very aptly in the poem. The factual evidence on record shows that color racism did not have its initial grounding in slavery. It also was not a product of antiquity. Color racism with prejudice did not originate with white European action connected to post-Renaissance or later New World colonialism and imperialism. Color racism began as an Islamic religious construct. After the justice of Islam came, Islamic doctrine was unchallenged for centuries. It led Arab believers to codify, justify, and construct color-racism. Then the outlook was exported with Islam's expansion. The 14th century North African-born Arab Ibn Khaldun, whom many consider to be the father of sociology, repeated a long-held Arab-Muslim stereotype in his writings. It declared blacks to be animals, cattle. This dehumanizing outlook was derived from Quranic teaching and doctrine long before the first black slaves were taken from West Africa to the Iberian Peninsula in 1441. The Quran teaches about cattle. It says there are some for meat and some for burdens, and then again there are some who walk on two legs. Sura 47:11 speaks about pairs from among yourselves and pairs from among cattle, suggesting that cattle were in fact a different breed. Under Islam, blacks could not be dubbed cattle unless there was a Quranic justification that supported the outlook, and there was. Surah 6:39-6 and 47:11 provided links for Ibn Khaldun's summary assertion of the outlook as he stated it in the 14th century. Surah 39:6 again addresses the question of who should mate with whom, and points out that cattle once more were a separate breed. The importance of the womb and womb relations is also referenced. Surah 1672 also carried forward the idea for an injunction against having any intimate relations with blacks. Do not bring black into your pedigree, because mates of your own nature are to be selected. The year was 750. Africa's central and western areas still were untouched by Islamic doctrine and outlooks. An Islamic Caliph received a black slave as a gift. He was not pleased. He explained that there was, quote, no color worse than black. Abu Uthman ibn Bahr al-Jahiz died in the same year the Zanj uprising began. He wrote of the change in racial attitudes towards blacks after the coming of Islam. Thus, al-Jahiz lay perhaps the first recorded indictment of Islam for the bigoted outlook that did not exist before the rise of the Islamic belief system. Under teachings in the Quran, Allah was seen as controlling everything with prejudgment that began in the womb. The Arabic designation of Allah as He who predestines all is Huwa al-Qadiru. Allah is your maker, your creator. In Arabic again, Bari'akum. He creates you, colors you. He gives you proportion and form to serve the purpose that the world can see. And He does this as He puts you together in whatever form He wishes. Allah is Al-Qadiru. It is He who colors you in the womb as He pleases. He knows who or what will come out of a female's womb. This is explained in Surah 35:11. Color-racism in Islam has long been a hidden history. Under the Arabic message in the Quran, the womb can be a gateway to things intimate and unseen, to secrets. Surah 9:23 explains that clearly. In its early veiled history, Islam and Arab Muslims used color coding to disparage both blacks and whites. Freedom then, and still in some quarters, has been said to go to hell. The year was 902. An Arab source on color-based concepts was clear. Both a black color and a white color were signs of a God-given genetic impurity and inferiority. The outlook on Arabs, the people of Iraq, come from the womb with a pale brown color. It is the most apt and proper color. In the year 902, Muslims still had no dealings with West African blacks. The source spoke of the outlook on whites. Whites, like Slavs and those of similar complexion, come from the womb blond, pale, and blanch, bearing leprous color. The outlook on blacks, blacks like Ethiopian, Zanj, and those of similar complexion, come from the womb murky, malodorous, stinking, with uneven limbs, deficient minds, and depraved passions. Historically and analytically, the evidence clearly shows that by the 10th century, the Islamic belief system had elevated color and race to a level of societal importance not previously seen. The signs repeatedly referenced in the Qur'an, which led to the Islamic birth of ColorRacism with Prejudice, were based fully on Arab-Islamic interactions with whites and East African blacks. After the Qur'an's message was revealed, it fueled a golden age of conquest and rule. Islam brought reworked concepts. They included ColorRacism, enslavement as a religious cure, slavery as redemption, and unbelief as a predetermined curse. In the 10th century, an Islamic poet explained that a person's race, racial heredity, and beginnings in the womb were defining for status. 1,000 years later, in the 20th century, Professor Syed Hossein Nasser echoed those same words to explain the importance of racial heredity. Sadly, the bitter fruit of a revelation from the 614 AD survives to this day in the 21st century. It is curiously ironic how Middle Eastern Islamic believers in contemporary times have positioned themselves as victims of the very concept of color racism and prejudice they began. Across Islamic history for more than 1,000 years, blacks and Slavs, as slaves under the hands of Muslim masters, were seen to have taken a positive step on the road to religious redemption. Some little widely known but very important personages in Islamic history commented on the nature of blacks and Slavs for their inferiority. Here are 3 examples. Color racism with prejudice became a new adjunct of slavery. It would take over 1,000 years before the West first moved to stop slave trading and then pursued a goal for the overall global abolition of slavery. A clear summation will show that the West and many average Islamic believers have been duped. The record shows that history has been doctored and that Islamic scholars have skillfully succeeded in turning truth to lie. The evidence of it remains available on record. Over time, deceptive distortions have spread across and within numerous Islamic societies and communities worldwide. Well-informed Islamic religious leaders camouflage the unvarnished truth that is often suppressed and hidden by Muslims who prefer deceptive proselytizing propaganda. The Quran teaches still that slavery is part of Islam, and in 2003 an Islamic authority confirmed it. As noted earlier, in its early veiled history, freedom was not something that was championed by Islam, and in some quarters still, the idea of freedom remains something that should be abolished. As things developed, European whites bought into enslaving blacks using color racism and prejudice. This, after whites had learned from Islam precedents regarding the signs in color. The evidence shows that European whites have carried a burden that is not truly theirs to bear. They did not create and make color racism with prejudice widespread initially. They have been turned into scapegoats, or in Arabic, taskhir li ta'allila. The misconception across time and in most books written about color racism is that slavery gave rise to and bred color racism. This is not factually accurate. The year is 1068. Said al-Andalusi spoke insultingly about whites and blacks and their inferiority. Sura 2:21 explained the idea that slavery under Islam conferred a higher rank. This introduced the novel idea not seen before that slavery under Islam was the first redemptive religious step. Evidence shows that the Arab Islamic world has enjoyed unprecedented success in planting racially based seeds of discord in the world since the rise of Islam. The 1955 conference in Bandung, staged as an Afro-Asian event which was financed by Muslim sponsors from the Middle East, is evidence of that. When Said al-Andalusi referred specifically to the savages of Ghana, the scum of the Zanj, and those like them in 1068, he showed that the racist outlooks of Islam had spread to West and Central Africa. The actions of European whites have drawn more ink and dramatic presentation than the defining despoliation of Africa by Islam. The novels of Chinua Achebe from Nigeria show that. This book, a corpus of early Arabic sources for West African history, holds primary Arabic sources for Islam in West Africa. Early Muslim medieval slave routes to the east. Muslims knew East African blacks for some 3 centuries before their encounters with blacks from Central and West Africa. This map shows the early broad regions within Africa. Chinua Achebe's novel Things Fall Apart dramatically depicts a 19th century Christian clash with traditional West African Igbo society. There is no equivalent poignant depiction of how Islam's coming clashed with traditional West African society. Nevertheless, the historical record holds evidence for a clash of outlooks. The modern work, Islam, African Religion and People of the Book, documents in greater detail what follows below in summary. It all began with the holy book, the Qur'an. In Arabic, the Qur'an is very clear when it says that Allah does not love those who are joyful and merry, or Inna Allah la yuhibbu al-farahina. Then again, another surah says the life of this world is alluring to those who reject faith. In its 114 chapters, the Qur'an casts aspersions on expressing joy and enjoying oneself in the present life. There are at least 116 times that believers are encouraged to seek the reward of the hereafter. As Sura 40:39 states it is the hereafter that is a home that will last. On the other hand, African blacks maintained oral traditions. They celebrated life in open-air cathedrals marked by trees. They paid homage to the unseen life force. They danced, laughed, cavorted, and enjoyed this world's pleasures, even when hardships imposed strictures. The African black spiritual outlook was life-affirming. By contrast, the way of the light of Islam requires studious intensity in prayer. These are the somber signs of true faith marked by piety without the polluting presence of pleasure. The traditional African outlook celebrated our life here and now. They took joy in open-air cathedrals, while Islam brought a look to the hereafter from a somber, bookish life, fearful of God. Under the Islamic belief system, joyful celebration of this life is not a good thing. The hereafter is the goal. Freedom and liberty are threats. This life is of some but little worth. Life springs from a despicable start. The female vessel of life is shameful, and there are other inbuilt extreme biases and prejudices. The contrasting outlook is clear. When African blacks drummed, danced, laughed, cavorted, and enjoyed this world's pleasures, even when hardships imposed strictures, their traditional life-affirming outlook clashed with Islamic religious doctrine. The early Islamic view was that slavery for blacks under Islam was a good thing, because in this manner the blacks were being herded, the cattle were being herded, on a way to redemption. The early Islamic outlook under Quranic doctrine had clearly identified that blacks were cattle because the Quran said that there are some who walk on two legs. When Arab Muslims reached West Africa, the heathenish, celebratory, fun-loving foolishness in life blacks exhibited had to stop. It was a sign of the animal nature of blacks, a sign of their backwardness and their ignorance of the true faith. They needed to be roped, collared, enslaved, and put on a path of redemption. Their service as slaves under Islamic masters would be a good and uplifting thing. Slavery became a benevolent religious gift from Allah, delivered under the hand of those whom He favored. When Islam reached the interior of Central and West Africa, what they saw there was not pleasing to them and taken to be a sign of God's disfavor on blacks. When they reached the interior of West Africa, the open-air cathedrals marked by trees and the sacred groves of the Africans had to go. The Arabic Qur'an, Arabs and Islam, gave birth to color racism with prejudice that the ancients and antiquity neither saw nor practiced. As Muslims saw it, the ancients had been blind to the signs in language and color that the Arabic Qur'an came to clearly point out. A reader today can see how the Arabic Qur'an, Arabs and the Islamic belief system, gave birth also to stereotypes that have become attached to blacks as unintelligent, ignorant, not serious, pleasure-seeking, too fun-loving, shameful, backward creatures. The historical evidence is abundant and overwhelmingly clear in the documented record of Islam. The Arabic Qur'an, Arabs and the Islamic belief system brought color racism with prejudice to the forefront of Islamic society, starting with its teachings in the 7th century.